to text-based writing grades 3 through 5 for reading 630. So glad you guys have joined us. We're going to hop right into text-based writing. But before we actually get to text-based writing, we want to talk about why we are centering this concept of engaging with text and writing at the same time. And it's this idea and concept that reading and writing are a reciprocal process. Many of us know the importance of the relationship between decoding, right, reading the words on the page, and encoding, spelling of the words. But when we look at the top part of the reading rope, we know that writing about what we read is not just about reading comprehension, but it helps students practice their writing skills, and it amplifies and enhances their comprehension. When we look at the reading rope next to the writing rope, we see a lot of the need for the text. When we look at the critical thinking strand, right? Part of the critical thinking strand is students gathering information, right? Gathering ideas and information. When the task requires them to engage in a text, we actually support building this strand because we are giving them the information as they think through how they are going to organize and sort it in a constructive manner for their writing process. They're mutually beneficial, right? Our language skills fall into two categories: input and output. Our inputs are receptive, right? Meaning they require processing, while our outputs are productive, meaning we have to draw on our processing in order to produce them. And so this reciprocity happens because in order to be able to produce outputs, we must first have or receive inputs. And when students write about something they have read, it forces them to more deeply think about those concepts that they have read, and they become better in cognition, right? But why is that important? Why do we want to build this, right? Other than for just say, we're not where we need to be. And more importantly, our students are struggling, right? Increasingly, our students are unprepared for college. 40–60% of college students require remedial writing courses. And as current college students, we understand that our courses cost money. And those remedial courses are not cheaper. And they actually don't often, cannot be attached to your degree plan. So it is increasing the financial burden of our students when they have to engage in a remedial writing course at the college level. And this tells us that our current writing instruction is insufficient for students to be college ready. Over 20 years ago in 2003, right, the National Commission recommended and called for schools to double the time of instruction spent on writing. And we know that's not a reality in our schools across the nation today. And more importantly, that writing instruction does not just start, or is not just emphasized in the middle school, but it starts in elementary. And we've got to think about how we increase that when we think about our 3rd through 5th graders. Right. This is further compounded in the results from the 2011 NAEP scores, right? Where only 24, so 1 in 4 students was performing at the proficient level. And while those numbers differ a little bit, when we look at demographics, background, experiences of our students, there's not a significant change, which paints the picture that this is a national problem. This is not specific to a group of students, but rather a national problem that we're seeing. The hope is that we did see for 8th grade students that those who spend between 30 and 60 minutes per day writing, we saw higher performance scores in those proficient levels. So knowing that, like, if we do increase those writing, we see an impact to how students are performing, directly supporting the recommendation from the National Commission. And so let's make those connections, right? So what do we do about it? We know here's the problem. What do we do about it? We need to use evidence-based, text-based writing, which means those writing tasks require students to use evidence from the text to respond. This starts as asking our students to write and cite an example in exit tickets or in small writing prompts, to eventually getting to more sophisticated writing at the high school level through APA and MLA citations. The key here is that this is a habit students must get into at a young age and engage with, right? we're saying that our instruction must demand that students cite and gather evidence from text, but why? Why? Right. Researcher Susan Pimentel tells us in faculty and student employer surveys, the kind of skills that score high are the argumentative and evidence-related skills, the developing ideas with relevant details and reasons. This means what we are asking college students and employees to do is to write in response to presenting ideas that are anchored in facts that are given through evidence, through text, right? Whether it be a survey or feedback, that it is anchored in, and we are, as an employee, is referencing information in their writing. And that telling stories and expressing one's feelings often rate very low. That's not to say that narrative writing has no place in our instruction. That's not what it's saying, but rather it's saying that is not where the value and emphasis is placed when we think about being college and career ready. And then the important thing to note is that when we ground student writing in the content of what they're learning, we're actually deepening their understanding of the material. Students who build knowledge using topic-based approach acquire vocabulary 4 times faster than disconnected text. So when we are building and using a knowledge building approach, and texts are building upon one another and are anchored in that knowledge, they build their vocabulary faster in a way that we have them engage with those texts to support that knowledge and vocabulary building is through using evidence-based text-based writing to have students solidify their knowledge and vocabulary through thinking on paper, right? This back to this idea of that mutually beneficial process that we experience. The simple view of writing, right? We have a sense of what students need to know and be able to do to be fluent writers. How do we teach? What does that strong instruction look like? And we know that there's a couple of different principles, but we want to center on this evidence-based writing should be grounded in the content students are learning and the knowledge that they are building. I'd be remiss if I didn't also point out a key piece, right, is explicitly teaching writing. We have to teach it to our students. We have to model it. We aren't centering our presentation today on that piece, but I want to name that that's a key component when we think about the bigger picture of writing. It's further supported by a 2020 report from Carnegie Corporation of New York that researchers recommended 3 effective practices for strengthening reading through writing. Number 1 being have students write about the text they read, including teach them the writing skills and processes and increase how much time students write, which we have talked about both in class as well as in earlier discussions. So what is text-based writing? We've talked about the case of why it's important, why we need it. It is defined as a cognitively demanding task that requires the application of a multitude of reading and writing. In other words, it requires the students to both read and write about what they have read. It is a response that centers around the text that they have engaged in. I love this quote from Achieve the Core that says, the more skilled students become at finding textual evidence to use in their writing and organizing it in service of presenting it in print, the better they will understand what they have read. Okay. So what is it? Okay. Defined it. Let's look at it in practice. Text-based writing is prompts that elicit questions such as, what does the author include? What did you learn about? Give 2 specific examples. What are some things you might see? Give 2 to 3 examples. What character? Use details from the text to support your understanding. What lesson? What in the story makes you think that? Each of these prompts requires a student to have deeply understood and engaged with the text to respond. What it is not, I love doing is and is not to help really clearly paint this picture for participants. It is not write a short story about a time a character experienced challenge and include internal dialogue in your short story. Or Wilbur seems like a friendly character. Tell me about a time you were a friend to someone. Both of these are writing experiences that do not require a student to center around the text. So take a minute, pause the recording at this time. Would love for you to reflect what stands out to you about the differences in each of these writings. Welcome back. I hope one of the reflections you landed on is that text-based writing requires students to use what they have read in the text to answer the responses. Another one is that when we look at the depth of what text-based writing is asking students to provide and perform at, is a higher level of rigor. We go back a slide, the higher level of rigor than what non-text-based writing requires of students. And more importantly, maybe one of my favorite reasons is that centering writing on text-based responses really creates equity for all students. McGowan and Beck highlight this clearly by telling us that when we ground the writing in discussion, not just writing, but discussion as well, in text, all students, regardless of who they are, their backgrounds, experiences, they're given the same opportunity to engage. It's not about what they've experienced in life. It's not about what they've read previously. It's centered around the text we've engaged. And furthermore, right, students who use multiple sources in writing were more likely to have stronger justifications. When we anchor in the writing and we use multiple sources, they're more likely to have stronger justifications for their stance, and we're more likely to actually anchor a response that is supported by their reading, meaning the response is more likely to be right. Go ahead and pause here. Can you think of an example of how this plays out in a classroom setting or a time you've seen this? Reflect before moving forward. For myself, when I think about our prompts, some of the prompts before, right? If we ask students to write about something they don't have knowledge on or experience with, right? So a travel, maybe, we may unintentionally be limiting the knowledge and vocabulary they can access in the writing. I think about when I taught 11th grade English, and I gave a prompt to my students asking them to write about organic produce and the role of why organic produce is important to communities. My students were from West Dallas, and many of them in the community in which they lived had not ever experienced or had access to organic produce because we had not read a text or centered or even explored this concept of organic produce. I wasn't able to even evaluate the writing ability, of my students. Because they didn't have the knowledge and vocabulary to access and engage with the prompts, much less demonstrate where they were in their writing journey. And so when they write about a text, how do we engage in a text? They're using the knowledge and vocabulary they've built to write. It's ultimately, it removes a barrier for our students. A clarification, we talked a lot about text, and so you might be thinking like, oh, is this just one type of writing? No, we're not saying that students only that students don't engage in a variety of writing, right? In fact, What Works Clearinghouse identified over 20 studies that met their evidence criteria to support the finding that students need to be taught the writing process for a variety of purposes. In other words, students do need to experience a variety of writing opportunities, such as expository, narrative, descriptive, opinion, or argumentative, right? But it centers around text. And the Writing Revolution by Hodgman and Wexler, they give some great examples. And so we borrowed their examples here, right, of the different types of writing. Explain why the rocket became interested in the story. You're going to have to go back to the text here. Discuss why the different disappearance of sea ice is affecting penguins. Describe the garden where Mary meets Ben. Summarize chapter 2. These are very different writing prompts for students, but all of them center around a text that we're asking them to engage in. Shanahan tells us students should not just be writing about text, they should be learning how to write about text effectively, how to write to text models, how to write summaries, how to write and extend critiques and analysis, and how to write synthesis, right? We are centering around a text, but it's not just about a text, it's about how they engage with the text. You've stayed with us this far. You might be saying, how do you do this? What does this look like, right? And so the first recommendation is center your reading and writing blocks. Don't have a separate reading and writing block. Make it a literacy block. We shared research about how this is a reciprocal process. And we know when we focus on writing, it doesn't just impact writing, it supports reading and a deeper reading and comprehension better. When you center the blocks together, it allows you to plan your time more authentically and efficiently. So instead of thinking we're going to write today after school, it's, okay, in this literacy block, how are we engaging with the text? And one of the ways we're going to engage with the text is writing with it. Select quality text. What students write about matters, right? I have two great examples I have nothing against Diary of a Wimpy Kid. My own children love it. But we have Esperanza Rising and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, both books that we might see in a third through fifth grade, a third through fifth grade classroom. But the content and rigor and what students can do with those texts are going to differ very differently, right? And you might say, how do I select that text? The first place I would start is to say, if you have an HQIM, use the text within your HQIM, right? There's studies that tell us that when we are using a quality curriculum, that impact, right? It is 4 times more cost effective, meaning the impact, the cost benefit in student performance is 40 times more effective than reducing class size. So if we have a high quality instructional material that is deemed grade level and aligned to rigor, use the texts that are there. They are going to be rigorous. They are going to be quality. If you self-select text, we recommend using the following from Achieve the Core. You can find it at Achieve the Core. It's referenced at the end in our citations. That really takes into 3 different measures when determining the text. There's a qualitative and a quantitative measure, both to identify a text, right? It's going to look at what makes that text complex and make sure that it is not overly complex, but that it's going to fit within it. And then use professional judgment. We never take away the professional judgment of the teachers in the classroom of how it is suited for both the instructional purpose, that it's meaningful, it's relevant, it has cultural relevance to our students, to our time period, and to building that knowledge for students. So you've selected your text, create text breaks prompts, right? And this is where we're able to see the value in selecting quality text and how it impacts, right? So Esperanza, for Esperanza Rising, text-based, both we have text-based prompts, right? Esperanza and Miguel take a train ride together as young children. Compare this train ride to the one they take when going to live in America, right? Really requires them to go back in the text and compare and contrast the experiences. For Diary of a Wimpy Kid, how does Greg approach choosing his seat on the first day of school? Right, and so want you to take a minute is to pause when you compare these prompts. What do you notice? What do you see? Both what the prompt is asking students to do, but also what would you expect from students in those prompts? Pause the video, reflect on this question, and then come back to us. Welcome back. What you might have reflected on, right, is that both prompts are text-based, but the quality of the response, the text Esperanza Rising is rich and full of meaning and purpose. The task here, this writing task, is going to really require them to deeply unpack and read and talk about 2 events, talk about the difference into 2 events. So we think about the approach Greg took to choosing his seat on the first day of school. I think about my own students. They might struggle to actually get to the depth of how much writing I might want to see for a 4th grader or a 5th grader. And so when I give a quality text, not only can I develop a stronger prompt, a writing prompt for them to engage in, they will have more content to write with, and ultimately give me a deeper writing experience. We include this not because this is where we are going to spend our time, but we want to make the connection to the learning that part of this process is you have to teach students how to write effectively. This is mentioned in previous lectures of the writing process. It's also mentioned, we referenced the writing revolution early. A lot of our importance lands on phases 1 and 3, right? Plan and outline and revise the draft. But remember that we need to make sure that our students experience a lot of opportunities with phase 2, creating that draft. And that this phase is not always the editing is not always explicitly taught, but each of these have value and importance in the writing instruction. Okay, let's apply our learning. We want you to take, so the book is The Giving Tree. We want you to take the following writing tasks for students, and we'd love for you to make a modification. to center it, to make it text-based, a stronger text-based writing task. So the original writing task is identify the characters from the story and the challenges they face. Using key details from the text, draw a comic book version at this point. Okay. And so our task for you is, we see that it is that there's some, we are using the text, but is the text really centered in this task? So go ahead and pause and think about how you might adapt this task to be more text-centered and stronger text-centered for the writing prompt. Go ahead and pause the recording, and when you come back, you'll see the example and a reflection question. Welcome back. So where we landed as a group, right, we have our original task, and our modified example was, what challenges do the characters experience during the story? Describe the challenges and explain how they respond to those challenges. And so at the reflect, you compare both yours and ours. How do these writing tasks differ? And what is required of students? And so when I look at, I like to think about it from student outcome lens, right? The original task, we've got a model here on the screen, right? The original task, we get something like this with minimal writing, right? Comic strip, kids probably had a lot of fun, but they more than likely spent more time drawing pictures of the comic strip, minimal writing, lots of pictures. In the modified task, this would lead to a student response something like this. In the story, The Giving Tree, the boy and the tree both enjoy spending quality time with each other. The boy loved playing with the tree's branches, eating his apples, and playing pretend play with the leaves. When the boy grew older, he then found other interests and decided he didn't want to play with the tree anymore, but needed things from him. This created a challenge for the tree. He was lonely. Over time, they both grew older and realized they needed each other after all, especially the boy. The tree provided him with what he needed, a place to rest in peace. So when I look at the writing provided on the modified task, we are both centering a more deeper understanding of the text, but it's really requiring a student to synthesize information as opposed to regurgitate or reframe the information in a different format, like a comic strip. So wrapping up our time together, if we want to change the narrative of writing in the United States, we have to ensure our students are college and career ready in writing. Ensuring our students are consistently engaging in quality text-centered writing will push them to develop in grade level rigor. And we do this by, right, we center our reading and writing blocks, recenter them and combine them and think about it as the literacy block. We select quality text, or we use the quality texts that are given to us. We create text-based prompts. We make sure they are centered. And we directly teach the writing process to our students to ensure that they understand what this looks like and how to go about it. And so to close us out on our time, right, we want to anchor in this quote from the Vermont Writing Collaborative. At the heart of effective writing is the building of knowledge and understanding what can be articulated in spoken and written language. Thank you guys for your time.